The day I became a legend in Pinecrest Meadows wasn't when I moved in, or when I renovated the old Wilson place, or even when I started coaching Little League. It was the day I drove home in a £12,000 monster truck named Neighborhood Watch. If you're watching this video right now because your neighbor keeps blocking your driveway, stick around. I'm about to show you how sometimes the biggest problems require the biggest solutions. Literally. My name is Trevor Mitchell. Until 8 months ago, I was living what most would consider a perfectly ordinary life. I'd spent 15 years building a construction business, had a comfortable 4-bedroom house in a quiet suburb, and generally minded my own business. I was, by all accounts, the definition of a normal, responsible 42-year-old guy. The most exciting thing I did was restore classic cars in my garage on weekends, a hobby that would ironically play a crucial role in what happened next. My nightmare began when Diana Winters moved into the house directly across from mine. From the moment the moving trucks arrived, there was something about her that screamed, "I'm going to be a problem." Maybe it was the way she directed the movers with military precision, or how she immediately began measuring the property line with a tape measure, or perhaps it was the 2-hour conversation I overheard her having with the mail carrier about the correct way to deliver mail to her custom-made, oversized mailbox. For the first few weeks, our interactions were limited to tight-lipped nods when we happened to collect our mail at the same time. I wasn't looking to make enemies, but I also wasn't going out of my way to befriend someone who had already complained to 3 different neighbors about their landscaping choices. Call it self-preservation. The trouble started on a Saturday morning when I was preparing to take my prized possession, a fully restored 1967 Mustang Fastback, to a local car show. I'd spent 2 years restoring that car, countless weekends hunched over its engine, meticulously returning it to its former glory. The Mustang wasn't just a car to me, it was a testament to patience, craftsmanship, and the sweet reward of hard work. As I backed out of my garage, coffee in hand and excitement building for the show, I discovered Diana's white Mercedes SUV parked directly across my driveway, making it impossible to exit without risking damage to either vehicle. I set down my coffee, took a deep breath, and walked across the street to her house. I rang the doorbell, prepared to politely ask her to move her car so I could leave. No answer. I rang again, waited, then knocked firmly. Still nothing, despite both her Mercedes and another car, a red Audi convertible, being in the driveway. Finally, I called the non-emergency police line. 20 minutes later, Officer Reynolds arrived, surveyed the situation, and tried calling Diana's house as well. When there was still no response, he authorized a tow truck. Just as the tow truck was backing up to the Mercedes, Diana emerged from her house in tennis clothes, looking outraged. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, storming toward us. "Ma'am, your vehicle is blocking this gentleman's driveway," Officer Reynolds explained calmly. "That's a parking violation. He couldn't exit his property and called us after trying to reach you directly." Diana's eyes narrowed as she looked at me. "I was in the shower getting ready for my tennis match. You couldn't wait 15 minutes. I tried knocking on your door multiple times," I explained. "No one answered. I've been waiting nearly an hour now, and I'm late for an event." "Well, I'm late for my tennis match now," she snapped, fishing her keys from her designer handbag. "Some of us have actual important commitments." Officer Reynolds stepped in before I could respond. "Ma'am, regardless of your schedule, you can't block someone's driveway. I could issue a citation, but if you move your vehicle now, we can resolve this without further complications." Diana gave an exaggerated sigh, as if we were the ones inconveniencing her, and moved her car. I thanked Officer Reynolds, got into my Mustang, and headed to the car show, arriving too late to register for the competition I'd been preparing for. I chalked it up to bad luck and poor judgment on Diana's part. Surely, this was a one-time occurrence. I was wrong. The following weekend, I came home from grocery shopping to find the same Mercedes parked in exactly the same spot, once again blocking my driveway. This time, I didn't even bother with the doorbell. I called the non-emergency line directly, requested a tow, and waited in my car at the curb. Diana emerged from her house just as the tow truck arrived, this time in what appeared to be yoga attire. "Again?" she said incredulously. "This is harassment." "You're blocking my driveway," I pointed out. "Again." "I was just about to move it," she claimed, though she had shown no indication of doing so until the tow truck appeared. This time, Officer Diaz responded to the call. She was less patient than Officer Reynolds had been. "Ma'am, this is the second reported incident in 2 weeks," she noted, already writing on her citation pad. "Blocking a driveway is a clear violation of Municipal Code 37.2. "I know the code," Diana interrupted. "My brother is a city attorney. This isn't intentional. I was just making a quick stop at home between appointments." Officer Diaz seemed unimpressed. "Intent doesn't change the violation. Here's your citation. If this continues to happen, the fines will increase, and eventually, we'll tow without warning." Diana snatched the citation, glaring at me as if I'd somehow tricked her into parking illegally, and moved her car with aggressive revving of the engine. After that incident, I hoped the citation and warning would put an end to the problem. Instead, things got weirder. Over the next month, Diana's Mercedes appeared across my driveway at least once a week, but always when my car was already out, meaning I'd only discover it upon returning home. Each time, it would mysteriously disappear within minutes of me calling for a tow, as if she had some sixth sense for when enforcement was on the way. It became clear this wasn't coincidence or absent-mindedness. This was deliberate, a strange passive-aggressive campaign that seemed to have no purpose except to inconvenience me specifically. I tried different approaches. I left a polite note on her windshield, explaining that I sometimes needed to leave quickly for work emergencies, true, as a contractor, and asking her to please respect my driveway access. The next day, I found the note torn into pieces on my lawn. I attempted to speak with her directly one evening when I saw her retrieving mail. "Diana, can we talk about the parking situation? I'm not sure why this keeps happening, but I park legally on a public street," she cut me off. "If you have a problem with the city's parking regulations, take it up with the city council." She turned and walked back to her house before I could respond. Next, I installed a security camera facing my driveway, hoping the visible deterrent would discourage her. Instead, she began parking just far enough away that she wasn't technically blocking the driveway completely, but positioned in a way that made it extremely difficult to maneuver in or out without risking a collision. When I showed the footage to Officer Reynolds during his next visit, he sighed. "She's staying just within the legal limit now," he admitted. "It's obnoxious, but not quite a violation we can cite. Have you tried speaking with her about why she's doing this?" "Every attempt at communication has been shut down," I explained. "I genuinely don't know what I did to provoke this." "Some people just need to feel like they're in control," Reynolds suggested. "Especially in new environments. I see it all the time in neighbor disputes." I thought about his words later that evening as I watched through my front window, while Diana meticulously measured the distance between her car and my driveway with what appeared to be a tape measure, adjusting the position until it was exactly at the legal limit. The situation escalated after I hosted a barbecue for my employees and their families. We weren't particularly loud. The gathering ended by 8 p.m. on a Saturday, but Diana called in 3 noise complaints. When officers found no violation, she resorted to standing at the edge of her property, photographing my guests and writing down license plate numbers in a small notebook. The next morning, I found my driveway completely blocked by not just Diana's Mercedes, but also her friend's red Audi. When I called for a tow, both drivers emerged from Diana's house immediately, moving their vehicles while loudly discussing how some people can't handle living in a social neighborhood. My breaking point came 2 months into this bizarre feud. I had an emergency call from a job site where a water main had broken, threatening to flood an in-progress renovation. I rushed out to my garage, only to find Diana's Mercedes positioned so precisely across my driveway that I couldn't exit without risking damage to either vehicle. This time, Her car was angled in a way that would make it difficult for even a tow truck to remove quickly. I called for a tow anyway and waited, growing more anxious as my phone exploded with messages from my foreman about the worsening situation at the job site. With each passing minute, the potential property damage and my liability increased. When Officer Diaz arrived 20 minutes later, she surveyed the situation and shook her head. "This is beyond ridiculous now," she remarked, calling for a specialized tow truck that could maneuver in tight spaces. "I've responded to 4 of these calls personally. This is clearly intentional harassment." But even with the citation and another stern warning, Diana seemed unfazed. When she finally emerged from her house, conveniently after I'd already missed the critical window to prevent significant water damage at my job site, she paid the fine on the spot with a credit card and a dismissive flick of her wrist. "Consider it a convenience fee," she said coolly as she returned to her house. That night, after dealing with the fallout from the job site damage, which would cost my business thousands in repairs and lost time, I sat in my garage staring at my tools and project cars, wondering what I'd done to deserve this targeted campaign. More importantly, I wondered what I could possibly do to end it. The solution came to me in the most unexpected way. The following weekend, I took my nephew Brandon to a monster truck rally at the county fairgrounds, a promise I'd made for his birthday months earlier. As we watched these massive machines crush junked cars and perform gravity-defying jumps, Brandon turned to me with wide eyes. "Uncle Trevor, your Mustang wouldn't get blocked if it was big like these trucks. From the mouths of babes, as they say." I laughed it off initially, but the idea took root. Not getting an actual monster truck, of course. That would be absurd. But perhaps a larger vehicle, something that would make it more difficult for Diana to block me in effectively, might be a practical solution while I explored more permanent options like legal action or moving. The next day, I began researching large pickup trucks. I'd been considering getting a more substantial vehicle for hauling construction materials anyway, so this seemed like a reasonable compromise. But with each passing hour of research, with each new incident of Diana's passive-aggressive parking, a small voice in the back of my mind kept whispering, "Why settle for reasonable when unreasonable is what you're up against?" That's when fate intervened. A buddy of mine who worked in film production mentioned they were selling off vehicles from a recently completed action movie. Among them was a modified Ford F650 that had been built to look like a monster truck for certain scenes. Not a true arena-style monster truck, but a street-legal behemoth with 38-inch tires, an elevated chassis, and enough ground clearance to drive over a standard sedan if necessary. Not that I would ever do such a thing, officer. "They're practically giving it away," my friend said. "It's too specialized for most buyers, and the production company just wants to recoup some costs." "Define practically giving it away," I replied. The number he quoted was substantial, $43,000, but not outrageous for a specialized vehicle that had cost over $150,000 to build. Plus, it was street legal, with some minor modifications, had surprisingly low mileage, and came with a full service history. I requested some time to think about it. This was, after all, a major purchase and potentially a major escalation. Was I really considering buying a movie prop monster truck just to solve a neighborhood parking dispute? That evening, I arrived home to find Diana's Mercedes and her friend's Audi positioned to completely block my driveway, with barely an inch between them. As I sat in my car, waiting for the now familiar tow truck to arrive, I watched Diana peek through her blinds, a small smirk visible even from across the street. I made the call to my buddy that night. 3 days later, I was the proud owner of a vehicle the previous production team had dubbed Decimator. I immediately renamed it Neighborhood Watch. Neighborhood Watch required some modifications to be fully street legal, slightly smaller tires, additional safety features, proper lighting. But my friend knew a specialist who could handle the work. 2 weeks and several $1,000s later, my new vehicle was ready. I deliberately chose a Tuesday afternoon for its homecoming. Diana, I had observed, typically attended a standing lunch date on Tuesdays, returning around 2:30 p.m. I wanted to ensure she had the full experience of seeing Neighborhood Watch for the first time. The rumble of the massive truck could be felt before it was seen. I had arranged for the specialist shop to deliver it, partly because I was still getting comfortable with driving it, and partly for the dramatic effect. As the enormous blue and chrome beast rounded the corner onto our street, windows in nearby houses began to fill with curious faces. Neighborhood Watch was impressive, to say the least. Standing nearly 9 feet tall with its slightly downsized but still massive 38-inch tires, custom suspension and gleaming paintwork, it looked like something from a post-apocalyptic movie, which, technically, it was. The shop had removed the more outlandish spikes and flamethrowers from its movie days, but had maintained the imposing grille guard and elevated light racks. Additional LED light bars had been added at my request, all properly aimed and installed to avoid blinding other drivers, of course. As the delivery driver carefully maneuvered it into my driveway, barely fitting beneath my raised garage door, Diana's Mercedes pulled onto our street. She slowed to a crawl, her expression changing from confusion to disbelief to something approaching horror as she realized the monstrosity was stopping at my house. I signed the final delivery paperwork in my driveway, making a show of inspecting my new purchase as Diana parked in her driveway and got out, phone already in hand. "What is that?" she demanded, storming across the street. I turned with an expression of mild surprise. "Oh, hello, Diana. This is my new truck." "That is not a truck," she spluttered. "That's a monstrosity. It doesn't belong in a residential neighborhood." "Actually," I replied calmly, "it's fully street legal. All modifications have been approved and documented." I patted the driver's door affectionately. "Safety inspected just yesterday." "There's no way that's allowed here," she insisted, already tapping on her phone. "The neighborhood association will have something to say about this." "We don't have a neighborhood association," I reminded her. "This is a public street in a standard residential zone. No special covenants or restrictions." Her eyes narrowed. "We'll see about that. I'm calling the city inspector." "Feel free," I said with a shrug. "Everything's in order. While you're making calls, though, you might want to move your car. It's been photographed blocking my driveway again, and I've already called Officer Diaz. She mentioned something about maximum fines and mandatory towing on the next incident." Diana's head whipped around to look at her Mercedes, which was indeed partially overlapping my driveway, a fact that had escaped her attention in her outrage over Neighborhood Watch. Without another word, she hurried to move her car, phone still pressed to her ear. Over the next few days, Neighborhood Watch attracted plenty of attention. Neighbors stopped by to see it up close. Most of them amused once I explained its origins as a movie prop. Local kids gazed at it in awe, and more than one parent asked if I might bring it to a future birthday party. Even Officer Reynolds stopped by, not in response to a complaint, but simply because he'd heard about it from Officer Diaz and wanted to see for himself. "Technically legal," he confirmed after inspecting it and my documentation. "Though I have to say, Trevor, this is quite the response to a parking dispute." "Sometimes big problems require big solutions," I replied with a grin. "Well, for what it's worth, Diaz and I have a running bet on how long it takes before she stops parking near your driveway completely," he admitted. "I've got $50 on immediately." Diana, meanwhile, was on a mission. True to her word, she contacted the city inspector, who visited my property, and confirmed that while unusual, Neighborhood Watch violated no city codes as long as it was parked in my driveway or garage when not in use, a requirement I was happy to comply with. Undeterred, Diana began circulating a petition among the neighbors, calling for new restrictions on oversized vehicles in residential areas. She found few supporters. Most neighbors either didn't care enough to get involved or were secretly enjoying the unfolding drama. The real test came the following weekend. I had deliberately kept Neighborhood Watch in my garage for several days, driving my regular car for daily errands. But on Saturday morning, I backed the massive truck out of my garage and parked it at the curb in front of my house, a completely legal parking spot. From my security camera, I watched as Diana noticed the truck from her window. She immediately got into her Mercedes and drove away, returning 20 minutes later. She circled the block twice, clearly looking for parking that wouldn't put her car anywhere near my truck. Finally, she pulled into her own driveway and parked, possibly the first time she'd used her driveway for its intended purpose since moving in. The pattern continued for the next week. Each time I parked Neighborhood Watch on the street, always legally, always considerately, Diana would go to extraordinary lengths to keep her precious Mercedes far away from it. No more strategic blocking of my driveway. No more carefully measured parking jobs designed to inconvenience me while staying just within legal limits. But Diana wasn't done fighting. Having failed with the city inspector and the neighborhood petition, she tried a new angle: noise complaints. Each time I started Neighborhood Watch, even in the middle of the day, she would call to report excessive noise. Officers would respond, measure the decibel levels with their handheld devices, and confirm that while loud, the modified truck wasn't exceeding legal limits. After the 5th such call in 2 weeks, Officer Diaz pulled me aside. "Look, Trevor, you're not breaking any laws, but this situation is consuming a lot of department resources. Is there any way you two can resolve this like adults?" I appreciated her candor. "I've tried talking to her multiple times. She's not interested in resolution unless it involves me bending to her will. The truck is actually serving its purpose. She stopped blocking my driveway completely." Diaz sighed. "Just maybe consider a muffler upgrade. As a courtesy to the whole neighborhood, not just because of her complaints." That seemed reasonable. I had the shop install a high-performance muffler system that significantly reduced Neighborhood Watch's rumble without compromising its imposing presence. It was a concession I was willing to make for the sake of my other neighbors, who had been remarkably patient throughout this escalating property dispute. Diana, however, took my reasonable compromise as a sign of weakness. The very day after my truck returned with its quieter exhaust system, I came home to find her Mercedes parked near my driveway again. Not blocking it entirely, but close enough to send a message. I walked across the street and knocked on her door. To my surprise, she answered. "Yes?" she said coldly. "I thought we were moving past this," I said, gesturing toward her car. "I upgraded the muffler system as a good faith gesture." "I don't know what you're talking about," she replied. "I'm parked legally on a public street." I studied her for a moment. "Diana, can I ask you something? What did I ever do to make you target me like this? We barely exchanged 10 words before you started blocking my driveway." For a brief moment, something flickered across her face, discomfort perhaps, or even guilt. But it was quickly replaced by her usual mask of contempt. "Not everything is about you," she said dismissively. "Perhaps you should consider that other people have legitimate reasons for their actions that have nothing to do with your persecution complex." With that, she closed the door in my face. I returned home perplexed, no closer to understanding the root of her animosity. But as I pondered her words, a new thought occurred to me. What if this truly wasn't specifically about me? What if I was just a convenient target for whatever frustration or control issues she was working through? The next day, I ran into my neighbor Ellen, whose property backed up to Diana's. Over the fence line conversation, I casually asked if she'd had any issues with our new neighbor. Ellen's expression said it all before she even spoke. "That woman reported my bird feeders to the Wildlife Authority, claiming they were attracting pests. An inspector came out and found nothing wrong, but she still sends me articles about bird-borne diseases at least once a week." Similar stories emerged as I spoke with other neighbors. Diana had complained about Roger's ham radio antenna, demanded that the Thompsons cut down a tree that dropped leaves into her yard, and called animal control on the Patel's cat for supposedly digging in her garden. A pattern emerged. Diana wasn't specifically targeting me. She was in conflict with nearly every household on the street in some form or another. I had simply become her primary focus, perhaps because I had the audacity to push back instead of acquiescing to her demands. Armed with this knowledge, and the community support it generated, I felt validated in my monster truck solution. Neighborhood Watch wasn't just protecting my driveway access, it had become a symbol of resistance against a neighborhood bully. The situation came to a head during a sudden autumn thunderstorm. Flash flood warnings had been issued for our county, and the rain was coming down in sheets. I was at a job site when I received an urgent alert from my security system showing rapidly rising water approaching several homes on our street, including Diana's and mine. Without hesitation, I drove Neighborhood Watch straight to our street, where I found water already pooling significantly. Diana's house, situated at a slightly lower elevation than mine, had water approaching her front door. She was outside in the pouring rain, attempting to stack sandbags that were clearly too heavy for her to maneuver effectively. I pulled up and rolled down my window. "Diana, you need to move to higher ground. This flooding is getting worse." She looked up, mascara running down her face, a mixture of rain and tears making it clear she was overwhelmed. For perhaps the first time since she'd moved in, the carefully constructed facade of control had crumbled. "My photos," she said, her voice breaking. "All my family albums are in the front room." I made a quick decision, parking Neighborhood Watch and grabbing my emergency rain gear from behind the seat. "Let me help with the sandbags first, then we'll get your albums." Together, we worked to create a barrier that diverted some of the water flow away from her front door. The massive tires and elevated chassis of Neighborhood Watch allowed me to retrieve additional sandbags from the municipal distribution point when smaller cars couldn't safely navigate the flooded streets. Once the immediate threat to her home was addressed, I helped Diana move her family photo albums and other irreplaceable items to her second floor. As we worked side by side, something shifted in our dynamic. Not friendship, certainly, but a temporary truce born of crisis. "Thank you," she said quietly, as we carried the last box upstairs. "Your truck actually proved useful today." It wasn't quite an apology for months of harassment, but it was something. "That's why I bought it," I replied evenly. "To solve problems." A ghost of a smile flickered across her face, there and gone so quickly I might have imagined it. The floodwaters receded by the next morning, having caused minimal damage to homes on our street, thanks to prompt action and neighborhood cooperation. Diana's house had suffered some minor water damage to exterior landscaping, but was otherwise intact. In the days that followed, an uneasy peace settled between us. Diana still parked exclusively in her driveway. Neighborhood Watch remained primarily in my garage, except for necessary trips, and neither of us mentioned our previous conflicts. Then, 3 weeks after the flood, a moving truck appeared in Diana's driveway. I watched from my window as she directed the loading process with the same precision she'd shown when moving in, her expression unreadable as her belongings disappeared into the truck. Later that afternoon, as she was doing a final inspection of the emptied house, I crossed the street. "You're moving?" I asked, though the answer was obvious. She nodded, her expression guarded. "I've accepted a position in Denver. Better opportunity." "Well, good luck with that," I said sincerely. "Denver's a beautiful city." Diana hesitated, seeming to struggle with what to say next. Finally, she reached into her handbag and withdrew an envelope, holding it out to me. "What's this?" I asked, not reaching for it immediately. "An explanation, of sorts," she replied. "And an apology, I suppose. You can read it after I'm gone if that's easier." Surprised, I accepted the envelope. "Safe travels, Diana." "Goodbye, Trevor." She turned toward her car, then paused. "Oh, and tell Brandon that his monster truck idea was genius. Kids always see the simplest solutions." With that cryptic parting comment, how did she know my nephew's name, or that the truck had been his idea? She got into her Mercedes and drove away. The envelope contained a 3-page handwritten letter. I won't share all its contents, as some were deeply personal, but the essence was this. Diana had moved to our street after a bitter divorce from a man who had controlled every aspect of her life for years. Our neighborhood had been chosen because it was similar to one where she'd lived happily before her marriage. Her ex-husband had owned a vintage Mustang identical to mine, which had triggered painful memories. Her attempts to control her environment, including where people parked, had been her misguided way of reclaiming power she'd lost during her marriage. "None of this excuses my behavior," she'd written toward the end. But perhaps it helps explain it. The monster truck was a stroke of genius because it was the one thing I couldn't control or intimidate. It forced me to confront how ridiculous I'd become. I stood in my driveway for a long time after reading the letter, feeling a complex mix of emotions: relief that the conflict was over, sympathy for what Diana had endured in her previous life, sadness that we couldn't have reached understanding without months of conflict, and yes, a small but undeniable satisfaction that Neighborhood Watch had ultimately done its job, just not in the way I'd anticipated. The new family that moved into Diana's house 2 months later was delightful. A young couple with twin toddlers who were fascinated by my big blue truck. They always parked in their garage or driveway, brought cookies during the holidays, and never once complained about noise. As for Neighborhood Watch, I kept it, partly because it had proven genuinely useful during the flood and for my construction business, partly because my nephew Brandon thought it was the coolest thing his uncle had ever done, and partly as a reminder that sometimes the most outlandish solution can solve problems in unexpected ways. If you're watching this video because someone keeps blocking your driveway, I'm not necessarily suggesting you buy a monster truck. But I am suggesting that sometimes thinking way outside the box is exactly what's needed, not just to solve the immediate problem, but to break patterns that keep conflicts going. And maybe, just maybe, to help someone else break free from patterns of their own.